All right, guys, we've got a lot to do. Our next test is the 8th, and we need to make sure we have all the game plan in so that we could develop, practice, make sure all of our questions are answered. So what I want to offer you, you don't have to, but stand up. We're going to do a little hip movement. If you'd like to, you can stand. If not, it doesn't matter to me, okay? But what I want you to notice, what I want you to notice is that hips, shoulders, upper extremities version of the lower extremities version of the upper. I can independently do this all day long and my balance isn't threatened. However, my hips, along with the other joints in the body, help to form what we call a base of support. It's our foundation so we could stand upright and not fall over, okay? Our base of support literally runs from the outside of one foot to the outside of the other foot. Literally makes a box about which our center of mass can sway and move around. As soon as we chop up that base of support, you're going to fall over. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It's literally just physics unless I have something to hold on to. Okay? So what I'd like for you to do right now is have a base of support around, let's say, your shoulder length, and just lift that foot off the ground just a tad and notice how you're going to sway over. Okay? All right? That's the first thing. Next thing is if you were going to abduct your hip and take your foot off the ground, notice how you're going to want to shift your weight to your other foot so that, again, you don't fall over. So it's really hard to abduct one hip and not abduct the other in order to kind of serve as a redistribution of your base of support. Because if you're on one foot, that foot is your base of support. You have to get all of your mass over that one foot. Your mass isn't over there. You're going to redistribute your weight so that your stuff is over the support leg. Okay? Y'all can have a seat. It should be on Moodle if you ever want to check.
I think it's at the 8th, and that's a Sunday, but I haven't put the 11th. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Exam 2, thank you for checking that.
Yeah.
Look right there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Dyslexia is a real thing. And growing up, when I would misspell something or when I would make a common dyslexic mistake, or even this weekend I was working in an event in Texas and I mispronounced something. Like, how are you a professor and you misspell, or mispronounce whatever you do? That's when I just want to absolutely throw a baseball as hard as I can, but not at them, at their vehicle. Okay? So mistakes happen. Thank you for checking that, okay? But it's right there. And if there is a mistake on there, let me know, and I'll fix it. So here's another thing with hip motion and gait. So sequencing, being not kangaroos, we're going to go one, then the other, then the other, then the other. In a graduate school, we call this controlled falling, because what you're going to literally do is fall and catch yourself. Fall and catch yourself. And it's controlled, but if you didn't catch yourself, you would control falling. Sprinters out of the block, that's why their reaction is a little extra, because when they come out of that block, if they don't catch themselves, they're going to fall. So you kind of have that reflexive to catch your fall, okay? In addition to catching yourself, we are also going to rotate. Our hips are going to rotate as we walk, rotate in their transverse plane. And the concept behind this rotation is hard to see, but I'm going to teach you, is that if I'm going to take a stride length, a step forward, not only will I use my hips to flex to get my heel forward, but in addition, I can also swing my pelvis by rotating my hip, and it's going to make my heel go a little bit more forwards. No different than if I'm trying to reach forward and I twist my trunk, I can reach a little bit further. Does that make sense? So as you're walking, and obviously the further you're striding, the more you're going to accentuate this rotation. But if you're weight bearing on your right foot, you're going to actually internally rotate, because that's going to swing the pelvis like this and take the left side, because remember they're attached, and swing the left side further forward so that you could have a greater heel strike. And then the left one is going to internally rotate and swing the other one. Okay? So you're going to have rotation as you walk. So, we did this, we did this. Let's get into some variations. So we had flexion, flexion from, extension to, extension from, flexion to, abduction from, adduction to, and we can actually have adduction from. Anatomical position being here, we have some room to go in this direction. In fact, if I abduct my right hip and kept my left hip in anatomical, I kind of have I won't say a lot, but I have some road that could go this way that you may not see because, with a hard endpoint or heel smacking up against heels. A lot harder to see at the shoulders because you got your thorax kind of getting in the way. But the road can travel in the direction of adduction from. Okay? It's one of the tricky things about learning movement from midlines, which I don't particularly care for because a midline is a point and joint motions are rotations. So some people will say, well, abduction is away, and in the hip you can't go like the shoulder, so life is good here. Until you do adduction and you actually go past its midline. And so it's like, well, am I going away this way or am I going away that way? So that's why I like to look at things as just clockwise or counterclockwise, rotating one way, rotating the other way, mirror effect so that you can look at the right side and say, here's 6 o'clock. Abduction is going to be clockwise rotation, getting me away from 6. Adduction is going to be counterclockwise rotation, and that's okay if I go past 6. I'm still further away from midnight in terms of rotation, the way it spins. And again, with the mirror effect, if I this one, the mirror has to do the same thing. If I'm in a mirror and I do this and my other arm goes out here, it's a possessed mirror. It has to do the exact same movement. So don't think that this is the same movements. It may look like it from a global reference. Okay? This is the same movements. Okay? Let's get into some rotation, because I think we did a lot of flexion, extension, abduction last class. Let's get into some rotations. Okay? Left hip, spin laterally. Left hip, spin medially. Externally, internally. We talked about how that is named, right? A lateral is a right of the right, left of the left. Okay. Left hip external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal. So one of the tricks is your instinct. You want to look at parts. You want to look at parts of the body and follow those parts. And I need you to see the actual bones that are articulating the joints. So if I cross one leg over the other, your instinct may want to say that is internal rotation. That's what your instinct wants to say. But the reality is that this is external rotation. External rotation. Now the illusion is because my knees flex posteriorly, my foot happens to be coming in, but foot is not hip. Internal, external. My elbow flexes anteriorly, so the hand actually follows the rotation fine. But if you think about it, they all follow the same rotation. Excuse me. Same rotation. Same rotation. Same rotation. Same rotation. Same rotation. Same rotation. So if this is internal, this will also be internal. It's the same rotation. If this is external, this will also be external. It's the same rotation. Cool? So on the test, left hip external, left hip internal. Any questions about that? We have a variation of ab and adduction. And the reason we have this is your clock in anatomical position, ab, add, doing it to the right. Again, why the right? Most of us are right-handed, and the right side matches up with clockwise and counterclockwise, and then you just have the mirror effect on the other side. Okay? But you can have this clock, and you can take it off of the wall, and then you can lay it on the ground, and you can still have a similar concept going away from 6 toward 6, clockwise, counterclockwise. Our ball and socket joints have a lot of movement. And therefore, even though you can only move in 3 planes at a time, when you get out of anatomical, let's see the best analogy for this. It's not perfect, but Lafayette is home, and I-10 runs east and west. Okay, so I'm home, and I can travel on that road. If I travel north, I can get on Interstate 20. It's a different road, but it also kind of travels east and west. So what I'm saying is that in anatomical position, I'm going to use my shoulders, but it's the same joint, and we'll do something with it. So what I'm saying is in anatomical position, we can go frontal, we can go sagittal, and we can go transverse. But if I travel north, whether I take this route or this route, I can no longer adduct when I'm in this position. When I'm here, I can no longer flex or extend. Okay. Now I can still move in 3 planes: frontal, long bones transverse, but now from a global reference, this would be like your sagittal, okay? But now I can move this way in terms of the rooms transverse, or my thorax is transverse, my socket's transverse. And we call this type of similar movement as regular ab and adduction. We refer to them as horizontal ab and adduction. It's just a variation, but we have to communicate that variation with a different name because there are different muscles that are pulling me across my body than straight down. There's some similars, there's some difference. So here is related to, but not the exact same as here. And here is similar, but not exactly related to there. So horizontal ab and ad. What would that look like if you were in, let's say like little seated hip machines, or you have the little squishy pad, okay? Horizontal ab would look very similar to regular ab. You're just in a different plane of the pelvis. Remember I said the penguin in the pelvis? The penguin has a perspective. The penguin in the pelvis is like, dude, you're in my transverse plane. I see it. If you do this, penguin's like, I see you're in my frontal plane. And think about making like a circle or a square around a block. We would have hip flexion, horizontal ab, and then regular ad, and we would get back to where we started. But I can't just do ab and ad and take the same route around the block. Flexion, horizontal ab, ad, and yeah, I did a little rotation, but I'm trying to show you the difference between the regular ab and ad, which is frontal plane of the penguin in the pelvis's perspective, and horizontal ab and ad, which is transverse plane of the penguin in the pelvis. Yes, ma'am?
Did you say that you have to flex or do flexion to do horizontal abduction?
You either have to flex, well, to do horizontal abduction first, absolutely you have to flex. You could abduct first, but then you have to do horizontal adduction. If that makes sense.
So it's necessary for.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, you can't do these, you can't do the variation in anatomical. Because in anatomical, my options are add, flex, extend, in, X. But once I get out of anatomical, I still only have 3 rows. But now, when I'm here, my flexion and extension road isn't there. I've moved away from being able to travel on that road. So it's almost like I have to take a detour to get back to travel on that road. And that detour we call horizontal AB and AB. So to try to make a little sense out of this, in anatomical, you cannot move 8 ways. You only have 6 ways you could potentially move. In anatomical position, we got the flexion and the extension, we got the ab, the ad, we got the internal and external. But if I've left my home and I'm in this new position, and on the test, it's gonna be like these obvious things. I'm not gonna be like, okay? But when I'm here, I still only have 6 options. Internal, external, ad, ab, horizontal ad, horizontal ab, because I'm not in a position to flex and extend when I'm here. Likewise, when I'm here, I'm not in a position to have regular ab and ad. Internal, external, flexion, extension, horizontal ab, horizontal ab. Okay? If you're confused about which one is which, they follow the same rules as the hip clock. So ab would take you away from 6 o'clock clockwise. add would rotate back towards 6 o'clock or past. So all I'm doing is taking the clock, laying it on the table, and doing the exact same concept. What I'll do is, so that you get a view of it, I'm going to try to get creative here. Everybody see I'm still in horizontal ab, horizontal add, horizontal add from, horizontal ab to, horizontal ab from, horizontal add to, horizontal add from. Here's a cool, I don't know, maybe it's not cool. But next time you're in the gym and you're doing the fly machine that allows you to go a little past, instead of doing both arms at the same time, so that would be like horizontal, AB and AD, do one at a time. So that way you can go past, you can do horizontal add from here and then here, because if you do them at the same time, they're gonna be each other's endpoint. And I'm not saying to do that because, oh, it's a super cool isolation. It's just to help show you the movement possibilities that you have sometimes that we stop, with exercises, endpoints that we create. So, for our hip flexion, hip extension, when we flex our hip, now we could do horizontal add. Y'all done these stretches before. It's like horizontal adduction, horizontal abduction. You feel those stretches. And then regular ab, regular add. Okay. Any questions? Let's get into some illusions of horizontal AB and adduction. Sorry, I'm a little down today, guys. I'm battling through, not a cold, I'm not sick. I had a fundraiser that they asked me to do in Texas. So I drive to Texas, I'm about to call their auction, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we need you to play a Simon Says game with everybody. And I'm like, bleh. And then after that, it was like, we have to, it's just like, dun 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 dun. It was a long day traveling back, and then the Saints. Saints, they're going to cause me to drink more. All right, guys, check this out. I think this is in your book, but if not, you have phones and stuff. Okay, start, finish. It looks like it's moving, and it is, right? Horizontal, add, from my left hip coming back. Horizontal, ab, leaving home. All right. What would that look like? That's what it would look like. What would it look like if I kept the door fixed and I moved the wall? It would look like this. Left hip, horizontal, ab. And I feel that stretch. Left hip, horizontal, add. Feel that stretch. Does that make sense? Here to there is the same thing at this hip as here to there. Horizontal add, horizontal ab. Cool? All right? Now, let's look at the right hip. My right hip. We did this one last time. External. Remember that? Right hip internal. Good? So if I flex my knee, my right hip is still in anatomical. My right knee may not be, but my right hip is still straight. Cool? So if I do this, and my penguin in the pelvis goes from looking at the right side of class to looking the center part of class to looking to my right side of class, my hip rotated. I feel it. It's about to make me cry. We need to be able to see what kind of hip rotation that was. I come back the other way. Once again, my hip rotated. You can see what kind of rotation that is. Okay? So, question for you guys to think about. I start here, and I do this. We've already answered that this is left hip horizontal ababa, but what type of rotation would my right hip be experiencing if I go from here to there? Don't answer it right away. You're good, I respect it, but I want people to have a chance to kind of give it some thought. So I'll ask when I'm ready. Okay. What do we know it's not? It wasn't flexion and extension, right? Kind of process of elimination. It wasn't ab and adduction. So we have a 50-50 chance with internal and external rotation. You see how sometimes you can make it a coin flip. Okay? Start, finish. This was right hip internal rotation. Freeze, pelvis, stay looking at the right side of class. Bring everything back to anatomical except the way my right hip is rotated. I'm going to use my thumbs, because look, my pelvis was looking here, now my pelvis is looking there. Do you see how it's internally rotated? I'd have to externally rotate to go home. So I had to internally rotate when I left home. I'll do it for you guys. Start, finish. I have to externally rotate to go back. That meant I had to internally rotate when I left. Any questions? Good? All right, let's try this one. This will be the hardest question you have on your test, which is on your test is Sunday. This is going to be the hardest test. Hardest question. When I say the hardest question, it's typically students who miss the most, even though I tell you it's not. Okay. I start here. I'm trying to have some consistency. Okay. From here, I'm gonna rotate, I'm gonna move both hips, but notice my left hip is in a different starting position than my right hip. My right hip is in anatomical, my left hip is not. So although my sockets have to move the same globally, they are not moving the same locally. That's why we spend so much time on reference systems. So start position, and I do this. I literally take my sockets and I do this with them. My penguin, instead of looking to the right this way, it's as if my penguin is doing a cartwheel to his right. And I feel that stretching. So what I'm asking you to figure out is, how would my right and left. I'm telling you, my right and left hip moved. The question is how? How did my right, and again, don't answer right away. It's not that you can't have an answer. Write it down or just lock it into your brain. I just want everybody to have a chance to give it some thought. Okay? Start, finish. Center of mass over my base support. Start, finish. And I'm making it obvious. Eventually, when we work into the trunk, it won't be so obvious. It'll just be like stuff like this. But we got to work up to that. Penguin, looking forward. Penguin in the pelvis does this. I have motion at both hips, and I'm asking you to try to figure out which motions I have. I'm going to give y'all some time. Note if you're ever playing Simon Says, this worked pretty good. I got half of the people out. I said, Simon Says, clap and cheer for the University of Alabama. Because like we're in the middle of Texas A&M country, and like half of the people are like, I ain't doing it, maybe 7. I was like, yes. I also did a Simon Says, don't smile, and then I started quoting Waterboy lines and lyrics to him. I said, how would be this all over? This thing got all new teeth and no toothbrush. I got it. All right, here we go. If you had to, is this my right or my left hip? Left, good. My right or my left hip? Good. If you had to put money, if you were a betting person, which one would you be more comfortable or confident in? My left hip motion or my right hip motion? Who's team right? Who's team left? Okay. It's just opinion. I'd put my money on the right. Okay. From here to there, I have right hip abduction, AB. So what happened at my right hip is that I got further away from 6 o'clock, but not because I did this. It's because I did this. I didn't do this. I did this. Sense? Nobody else in the country teaches with a $5 clock, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the hard one. This is a hard one. That doesn't mean it has to continue to be hard. Come here, you. Before I move the socket, what was this movement? Internal or external? External. This was internal. Reminder, okay? So, think of it like this. I'm not saying this will always work, but when I'm here, when I have external rotation, it's as if my penguin is looking at my shin. When I have internal rotation, my penguin's like, where'd the shin go? Okay? So watch this. From here to there, is my penguin looking at my shin? Yeah. So that meant my hip had to have external rotation. Because from here to there is the exact same as from here to there. Here's another way to look at it. Once I'm in my new position, I could say, hey, left hip, I don't like when you move the wall over the door. Go back home the way I'm most comfortable with. And the hip's like, yeah, man, no problem. Wouldn't the hip have had to have internally rotated to go back to anatomical? It's anatomical. So that proves it had to externally rotate when it left. When it went away. So there's no rule that says I have to have ab for ab. There's no rule that says I have to have internals for externals. There's no rule that says I have to have horizontals for horizontals. Because if you're on a knee, one hip is in anatomical and the other is not. And so that pelvis can move those sockets and you can have independent hip motion about each. Yes, ma'am?
Anatomical right now, just moving like that.
Mm-mm. The left one was flexed.
I thought you just stood up with it as you are right now. But I was
You
thinking-
felt, and I'm not, you know me by now, I'm repeating your words so that I understand what you're asking. But I felt that if you stood up, you would then be an anatomical. The problem is, I wasn't standing up when I was doing this example.
Cause I get it, how it was, you have to externally, or, yeah, no, internally rotate,
Uh-huh.
which means you were external, whenever you were leaning. But as is now,
Yeah.
your left hip is not anatomical.
My left hip is flexed. And because it's flexed, internal and external rotation is going to be this. And so if my socket, if this is internal and external rotation when my hip is flexed, then this will also be internal and external rotation when my hip is flexed. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yes, ma'am?
So if you were to, like, if you were to do that same thing, but you were standing, it would be it, because your hip is in flex. So if you were to just move your hip.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, for your question, I'm gonna keep everything the same, except I'm gonna put my left hip back in the top position. Hey, pelvis, do a cartwheel to your right. Right hip ab, which is the exact same thing we had before, left hip ab.
That's where I was going with hip, and then I just wanted to flex.
Stay like this. At my age, I may literally stay like this.
Okay.
All right, let me show you a cool trick, okay? You're welcome. Cool trick, cool trick. Add, okay? Oh gosh. Forget about this one. So it's like bang, try it. Bang. It's the first time I've ever tried that. Can't you tell? It's going to take practice, guys. It's going to take practice. However, the fact that it might be weird or difficult is a good thing, I think. It's challenging. You know, school should be challenging. But once you guys start seeing the hip and pelvic positions in motion, man, it's going to help you be much better clinicians, coaches, trainers, because you're gonna be able to see people's, we call it obliquity, but you know, their pelvis is gonna be pouring water out certain ways. They're gonna be having position changes that they need help with, but it may not be obvious to the untrained person because they're just gonna see a straight leg. But what they're not gonna see is maybe a pelvis pouring out, a penguin looking straight down at the ground. And their hips are flexed because of it, and their trunk is extended because of it, but everything looks normal because the leg is perpendicular to the ground. So, let's see, we got a couple more minutes. Let me run through a quick review of what we have so far. I'm not gonna say the side to speed it up. Plantar dorsi of the ankle, inversion, eversion of the subtalar. Plantar dorsi of the ankle, inversion, eversion of the subtalars. Okay? Told you guys I'd love for you to know that pronation is gonna be like a closed chain eversion, and a supination is like a closed chain inversion. People that have flat feet are typically pronated. People that have high arches or pes cavas are typically inverted. Knee flexion and extension. And then when the knee is flexed, you get some rotation in there. It follows the same rules as the hips, lateral or external, medial or internal. The illusion that gets people is this is actually external rotation of the knee. This is internal rotation. Hip, flexion and extension, ab and add, external, internal, or lateral, medial. In your book, it has a little paragraph about circumduction. Circumduction isn't an individual joint motion, it's a movement pattern. It's a movement pattern. In grad school, and maybe even in undergrad, they'll talk about dermatomes and myotomes and movement patterns. And all circumduction is a combination of multiple joints moving at the same time. Think about it like this. You cannot move one joint like a tire, meaning you spin it and it just keeps going and going and going. Every joint has an end of a range of motion. Make sense? I can flex until I can't flex anymore. I can extend until I can't extend anymore. And those end range of motions are either because of soft endpoints, squishy stuff, firm endpoints, ligaments, or hard endpoints, bone. But yet I could sit here and do this all day long. It's not magic. It's just I'm going up and to my left, now up and to my right, now down and to my right, now down and to my left. You're just constantly going around the track, but the track is constantly redirecting your direction. So it's a movement pattern.